Good evening everyone, and welcome to this PCSE webinar looking at Type 1 annual certificates on PCSE Online. Thank you to those of you who have joined us, so thank you for taking the time out of your day to be with us. My name is Katrina Veneris. I work for the pensions team at PCSE, and I have my colleagues from the communications team supporting me this evening, Debbie and Kat, so thanks to them for helping along with the technical side of things. So I'm going to start with some presentation slides and then take you into the live test environment. So quite a packed agenda. So the first thing, as we always do, point out when we come to talk about end of year would be the important deadlines. So the Type 1 and Type 2 forms will be live on PCSE Online this Friday, so the 27th of January. They are already, of course, published by NHS Pensions on their website, but the PCSE Online versions will be ready for you to use from this Friday. The deadline for submitting Type 1 and Type 2 forms for 21-22, regardless of whether you submit them on PCSE Online or through the Contact Us route, which will also be live on Friday, so the online form, as people would know it. The deadline is, as usual, the 28th of February. And again, the same as normal, then all of the forms that PCSE receive and are able to process, so assuming they've got all the required information, etc., they will be processed in time for the deadline that NHS Pensions set us of mid-June, which is to make it in time for the August refresh of the total reward statement. Obviously, if there are errors in forms or missing information, things like that, then there may be a delay in processing. We will do our best to still get you through in time, but you know, that extra care and attention is worth taking care of up front. The other thing that is just worth mentioning at this point is that we also would like to remind you about the NHS Pensions site is updated sequentially. So the total reward statement will only refresh to include your 21-22 information if we've been able to process all of your previous certificates successfully. So if there are any gaps in records, then unfortunately, because Pensions Online does update sequentially, then you will only see up until the last form that was completed in sequential order. So for example, if someone had a problem with their 2018-19 form and hadn't managed to resolve that, then the gap in their records would be there. The record would only show up until 2018-19. Your onwards certificates wouldn't refresh. So we do encourage you to have a look at the listing screen on PCSE Online. That will show you what certificates that we have been able to process for you. And if you have any missing certificates, then we would encourage you to submit them. If you've submitted them previously, have a look out for emails where we may have asked for information or clarification, and we'll work with you to get them processed. So as I say, the Pensions Online system and your total reward statement will only update to the current year when all the previous years have been successfully processed. So just going to PCSE Online then, before we even get to the end of year certificates, then what we would encourage you to do is to log on and look at your employee contribution statement. Now, regardless of whether you're a GP or a non-GP partner who is going to complete your Type 1 form yourself, or if you're going to get anybody to support you with that, be it an advisor or an accountant, then the first thing, as I say, we recommend you to do is go to PCSE Online, click on employee contribution statement, and you'll be able to filter to the year. So we'll be looking at 21-22, to the income type, so profit share if it's Type 1, this example is monthly salary, select the practice and your pension scheme. When you've completed the search, then you'll be able to download the statement and email it to your accountant or your advisor. It's probably worthwhile just pointing out that your monthly pension contribution deductions are based on the estimate that the practice submitted for 21-22 for you. So that's what will show on your employee contribution statement at this point. So that's what has been based on the estimate the practice has submitted. And obviously, if you have had any solo or locum contributions, then they will also show on the statement. So just an example here on the screen, then the employee contributions value, employer contribution value, total value, and if there were any VCs, then the total value there. These are the figures that will auto-populate into your Type 1 certificate as contributions already paid. So this is an example of an employee contribution statement for 21-22, and this has been an estimated profit share and income of 130,000. So you can see the employer and employee contributions that have been deducted from the practice's monthly contractual payment during 21-22, all based on the estimate. And then obviously the end of year certificate is completed to then complete the reconciliation and make any adjustments to contributions as necessary. So your employee contribution statement, all important to check that before we start with the certificate, and you can see that you've got an opportunity to download it as a CSV or a PDF or print it should you wish. So one of the hurdles that a few people have faced when they get to that point is that they look for the practice that they've been working at and under the select practices option, and it doesn't appear, it's not there. So why would that be? There are a couple of reasons. The first thing that you need to do is to go to your performer list record. So when you're logged into PCSE Online, if you're a GP, then you'll have a performer list button. And when you click on that, then you'll see the performer homepage. Now, that is where you'll be able to access all of your performer list records, including the employment details that we have on the system for you. So if you go to click the change history button, then you will be able to check if there's any employment change awaiting approval. So one of the reasons that you're not showing attached, you would not be showing attached to a practice on the employee contribution statement would be if the employment change either hadn't been completed or hadn't been approved. So when you've looked at the change history, then if you haven't submitted an employment change, then and it's not listed, then you will then need to submit the employment change. So you'll need to confirm that you're starting or that you started at a new practice, add the practice details and submit that. That all needs to be done from a performer list perspective before you can complete the pension joiner form. And if the practice is showing under the current employment details in your performer list area, then, or if indeed the employment change is awaiting approval, then speak to the practice manager to resolve this, because it may be that the pension joiner form just needs to be completed, or it may be that the employment change needs to be approved first and then the pension joiner form needs to be completed. Now, clearly we're talking about the 21-22 year here, so this should be few and far between. And previously, then the practice manager wouldn't have been able to update this without contacting PCSE if a pensions joiner hasn't been completed for a previous year. But the changes that are going into the PCSE system on Thursday evening, so when the new end of year forms go live, this also includes an enhancement to the pensions joiner form so that it can be completed retrospectively, and indeed the pensions leaver form. So if you do find yourself in this situation where the practice is not showing in the options, the practice options that you have in the drop down on the employee contribution statement, then this is now much more straightforward to sort out come the end of this week. So that is something that hopefully is helpful to anyone who has had problems in that area. But then just going straight on to how we complete the type 1. So hopefully most people will have seen this and had to click around PCSE Online already, but we have the annual certificate button. So their first step is to click that. When we've clicked the annual certificate button, there'll be two options. One is the annual certificate forms button, one is the listing screen button. So if we click annual certificate forms, and then we will see that as if you're logged in as a pension scheme member, then your details will auto-populate in terms of name and pension scheme number, SD number. And then the next thing you would do is to select the practice from the drop-down. So once you've selected the practice that you've been working at, your financial year drop-down will then show you which certificates are outstanding. So in this example here, then the 1920 form hasn't been completed or started yet. It will show in red if it hasn't been completed or hasn't been started yet. However, show this screen, if the options in the financial year drop down show as already initiated or completed, then that means that you may have obviously either fully submitted the form, or, as often is likely to be the case, you have started to complete the form even just on the first page, and that then becomes a draft. So as soon as you start completing the certificate, it becomes a draft, and in order to access that and continue with it, then all you need to do is click on that listing screen button again. And in the listing screen, you will have a list of all the certificates that you have either fully submitted or that are in draft status or in any of the other statuses. So if you have a draft certificate that you need to continue with, then there's a blue certificate reference that's a hyperlink. All you need to do is to click that. That will open the certificate and that will allow you to start completing. If, however, you decide that you want to start afresh, then when you're looking at the listing screen, you won't immediately see that there's a delete button. So you'll only see as far as the draft with the little symbol, as you can see on my screen here. But to be able to see the delete button, all you need to do is scroll across to the right with the scroll bar and you'll see any extra information. So if you wish to, then you can click delete and that will allow you to start the certificates again from scratch. But equally, if you want to carry on with the draft that you've started, then all you would do is click the hyperlink to open it and carry on from where you'd left off. So that's your drafts and what to do if you see that already initiated or completed message. And the other thing to look at in terms of the listing screen is what's called declaration status. So if you've gone as far as submitting a certificate, then it will show as declarated until PCSE have reviewed it. So from when you log in and it shows as declarated, you know and you can be comfortable that that has successfully made its way through the system and it's waiting review by PCSE. Now, when the PCSE team have reviewed a certificate, it will go to either approved or rejected status. So if a certificate has been rejected because of some sort of issue or discrepancy, then when you go to resolve that and resubmit it, the first thing you need to do is again scroll along with the scroll bar and you'll see this revert to draft option. And there's a little red symbol on just underneath the revert to draft option. When you click on that, that takes you back to a draft and you can then edit and go to resubmit your rejected certificate. If you simply click on the hyperlink for a rejected certificate, then it won't let you edit it. So it won't allow you to edit it, and we get a lot of queries into our customer service centre about that. You know, for people saying, you've rejected my certificate and now it won't let me do anything with it. And actually what you need to do in that instance is scroll along to this revert to draft bit, this little red symbol, a little bit innocuous, but we have made it red to try and make it stand out. Click on that and that then makes the form editable and you can get so far as a resubmission. So that's what you would do with a rejected form. If you have an approved certificate, so your type 1 form, you've submitted it to us, we've reviewed it, approved it, everything matches up, there's no discrepancies, no issues, but then maybe there's something that comes to light from your accountant or advisor and you decide that you need to resubmit that form. Then again, if you scroll along when you're in the listing screen area, then you'll be able to see at the very end of the row that resubmit button for approved certificates. So all you need to do then is click resubmit. That will then effectively create you a new version of your certificate for you to complete, make any amendments, update, and again click submit to send it off to us. So hopefully that just helps with the navigation around the listing screen. Just to recap, as soon as the certificate has been started, so as soon as you've selected practice, financial year on that front page, then that becomes a draft. And if you go to, the button to enter a form again, it will look as though it will give you that initiated completed message. So all you need to do is go to the listing screen and find the year or the certificate that you are still working on and continue with the draft. Or like I say, if you wanted to, then you can delete off any draft and start again. Just a couple of key call-outs that we want to point out just from some of the things that have caused some discrepancies and some queries in the submission of the online certificates last year. Annualisation, looking at whether or not the annualisation calculation needs to be applied. Obviously, there's comprehensive guidance on the NHS Pensions website about the rules in relation to annualisation, and PCSE would direct you to that guidance, but it's just one of the things to pay particular attention to if your membership, whether your membership was continuous throughout the year or not, and then if not, then looking at the annualisation calculation, and also to just look carefully at the box or boxes that give you the option to what to do on your type 1 certificates if you're a GP and you have any underpaid solo contributions, so whether to collect that from your main practice contract or not. So again, it's mandatory to select one of the options, but just make sure that you've checked and selected the option that you want to proceed with. So just a couple of key call outs there. The next thing I want to just talk about for a little bit is adjustment calculations. So when you make your way through your type 1 form, then when we come to the calculation of contributions screen, you've got the 3 main columns there. So you'll have the tier rates, which have just cut off to the left there. But you've got the contributions due, which will be calculated automatically based on the annual income or profit figure and the tier rates that have been selected. And then you get this contributions already paid figures, both in terms of employee, employer, and if there have been any AVCs. Now, I think I mentioned at the beginning that the contributions already paid column automatically populates with what has been deducted from the practice already, so during the year, and that would be, as I said, your employer, employee, and any AVCs. So the column that we've highlighted with number 3, then this is the difference between the two, essentially. So your contributions due minus your contributions paid. Does that result in an under or overpayment for that year? Was it absolutely spot on? Was the estimate perfect? So that's where that calculation takes place. Now, the button or the box, 89A, gives you that total value, and that total value as it stands would be processed as an adjustment automatically in the next contractual payment for the practice that you've been working at, that you've been processing the certificate in relation to the work for. Now, this is going to happen in the contractual payment after the certificate's been processed. So depending on the time of the month the practice receives the contractual payment, etc., then that will dictate when the payment or the adjustment will be processed. So obviously if contributions have been underpaid, then that will be a deduction from the practice, and if contributions have been overpaid, then that would be a refund to the practice. Worth bearing in mind that if a practice has a number of pension scheme members who are submitting type 1, type 2 forms, then it's possible that they'll have multiple, and if for those members, if the estimates were a bit on the low side for 21-22 as it turned out, then it's just worth bearing in mind that all of those deductions will be taken as and when the certificates are processed, and so that might mean in some months that there's multiple deductions taken, but of course these are all pension contributions that have been taken at source from the pension scheme member, the GP or the non-GP partner, but obviously from a practice point of view, it's just the awareness that these adjustments will now be taken. So the standard process is for that to be taken in the next contractual payment. We do, and NHS England, I'd say strongly advise that practices should wait for any underpayment to be deducted via an adjustment to the next contractual payment. However, we are conscious that from an accounting perspective, then there is often a recommendation to make payments up front to make sure that they are deducted in the current tax year or paid over in the current tax year. So we see, and we saw last year and in previous years, a number of payments coming into NHS England's bank account as unallocated cash from practices in relation to GPs and non-GP partners, where the estimates had been on the low side and the contributions, therefore, that were being deducted throughout the year were less than what ended up being due. And the practice made those payments to NHS England. It's then for PCSE to identify which GPs or non-GP partners the payments belong to, what the payments constitute in terms of the split between employee, employer, and potentially ABC contributions, etc. So all of that needs to be done to make sure that the pension member record is brought up to date, the payment is allocated so that the pension scheme member's record can be brought up to date, and that needs to be brought up to date then in line with so the certificate can be processed. So we have this year set out a clear process for practices to follow if it is decided that they are going to make ad hoc end of year payments. There's a dedicated template that we've drafted with various pieces of information that we require to make sure that the payments can be allocated to the GP or non-GP partner. We did have quite a lot of instances in the past where practices may have, say 4 or 5 pension scheme members where they need to make a payment for each of them because there's been an underpayment for each of them, and they've then sort of made a single payment and combined all of that together with, say, maybe using the practice codes as the back reference, and all of that has led to delays and difficulties making sure that these payments get allocated and allocated in a timely fashion. So this process has been set out this year so that if there are any ad hoc payments that practices are making, they're made per GP or non-GP partner and with the level of detail submitted to PCSE via template that comes to us through the Contact Us form. It's all set out in the end of year guidance that we sent out last week, and that shows you the steps to follow, including the back reference format, so at an individual GP SD number level and the year that the payment relates to, etc. So if there is to be any payments, ad hoc end of year payments made, then we would really plead with you to make sure that we follow the process so that we can get these allocated as quickly as possible, and the pension scheme members' records can be updated and the certificates processed. So that's the end of year payments. We've been focusing and will focus most of this session on PCSE Online. However, there are some tips really that we've put in the end of year guidance for people who are going to submit the Type 1 or Type 2 forms via the Contact Us form. It is fair to say that every year we've seen a number of forms that we've had to return because something's been missed or some calculation issue. And so the tips that we've pulled together are just simply to try and make sure that if the forms come in from the contact or via the Contact Us route, so they have been completed manually, then we want to be able to process them successfully at first touch, so that as a GP or a non-GP partner, your records are updated as soon as possible and you get to that all-important TRS refresh. So NHS Net address is the first thing to mention. If you are using the Contact Us form, then the email address that's entered in the creation of the Contact Us form needs to be an NHS Net address if the certificate doesn't have a wet signature. If for some reason you don't have an NHS Net address, then there does need to be a wet signature on the Type 1 certificate. Other important things to call out are key bits of information. Your SD number and your national insurance number need to be completed. You can see these, you can see your SD number when you log into PCSE Online. A lot of people will say, I don't know what my SD number is, or I don't know what the SD number of the GP's working with practice is. Then we can find that on PCSE Online. And obviously it's also on certain correspondence from NHS Pensions. When completing the certificate, then it's important the ODS code for the practice is entered so that we can make sure we've got the correct practice details. The practice manager will be able to put you right on that if you don't know what the ODS code is. Then there's some specific boxes to pay really close attention to, depending on if you started or left a practice during the year of 21-22. For anybody who's retired, there are certain areas where we need to really focus, and there is very detailed guidance from NHS Pensions on completing the whole form. So these are just a few top tips for the sort of areas where we found that we've had to make returns of forms or send them back to, to have something looked at again. And, it goes without saying, and most people probably think it's a bit churlish to say it, but everything needs to be legible and all the correct pages need to be filled in. But we do every year receive, some forms where figures and so on aren't legible, and that obviously means that they have to go back. And I've already mentioned about the annualisation guidance. It does seem to be an area that causes a bit of confusion, so please take time to check if that applies to you, and if it does, then have a look at all of the guidance from NHS Pensions on the calculation. So we have got this end of year guidance that we've sent with the special bulletin on end of year towards the end of last week. So hopefully everybody who's joined tonight seen that, and that's maybe where you saw the webinars advertised. So I'm hoping that you all did, but we hope that people are starting to find that useful, and it just goes through some of the key checks to do and what to do when things don't look as you're expecting before you actually have the form submitted. And I think we're going to just try and show you a few of the screens from the test environment. So we've got this test environment for PCSE Online. If anybody's joined any of the webinars in the past, they'll know that there's always a lot of caveats about the test data. The test environment, just in terms of some of the data, can look a bit strange. There's a lot of different testing goes on round the clock, really, so there could be weird and wonderful things happening as we go through the system. But wanted to just show a little bit of live navigation around about the system, which will hopefully give a little bit better feel for how easy it is to use than the screenshots, really. So this where we are on this screen, we've logged in as a test GP. So we've got performer list button, like we mentioned earlier, and we've also got the pensions button. So we've got a performer list page that we showed. But if we go back to pensions, then what we want to look at is our annual certificate. So just clicking on the annual certificate button, and we've got those two buttons that I mentioned, so listing screen and annual certificate forms. If I go to annual certificate forms, then you will see that if I just scroll down a little bit, then my details, my test details as Mr. and Mrs. Test 4, or Dr. Test 4, sorry, I've logged in as, and then I can now select the practice that I've been working at. So this is my practice. And then what we should see, depending on the test data, so we've got 21-22 here. So that's red, and that allows me to select that. I just get this pop-up message telling me that I need to check the pre-populated values, just as a bit of a warning, really. And then what you'll see is that we're able to go through and complete all of the relevant details, all of the data through each of the sections, as you would be doing on the Excel version of the form that's downloaded from NHS Pensions website. So as we go through each page and we click Save and Next, then you'll see that we kind of populate down through the different pages. So what I've tried to do is partially complete a form. So I'm just going to move to another screen. So now we've got a different test GP where we have partially completed the form, and we've just opened it at the section where the calculation takes place. Now, this is showing us here that we've got the contributions due based on the tier rates of 4.5% and the pensionable income or profit that we've recorded on the form. So we've got contributions due as employee contributions of 20,917.12, but the contributions that have been deducted throughout the year, so the contributions already paid, 18,849.97, which would give us an underpayment of just over 2,000, as you can see there. And then also employer contributions, 14.38%, so obviously quite similar to 14.5, so we've got quite similar figures. The contributions due, 20,744. Contributions already paid, 18,693.97. So again, we've got this underpayment. So we've got a combined underpayment of 4,117.19. And if we move this form through, if we have any solo income, then we would get onto that section. But if we then move through the sections of the form and declare this as our year-end submission, then this 4,117.19 would be taken, as I mentioned earlier, in the practice's next contractual payment. So depending on cut-offs and payment cycles and things like that, then it would be in the next contractual payment, next available contractual payment for the practice. Now, if instead of waiting for that to take its course, if the practice has made a payment, is making a payment up front to NHS England's bank account based on the calculations that have been done through the accountant, the advisor, practice manager, whoever has done the calculations, then if they've chosen to or opted to make this payment of 4,117.19 or a slightly different figure, whatever it is that they've paid, then the contributions already paid should include any values that have been paid upfront as an ad hoc payment. So if the practice has already made payment here for this difference, then the contributions already paid should be entered and updated. So when you're I'm completing this as a front end user, as a GP. So remember, your employee contribution statement will only show what was deducted throughout the year at this point in time. When the payment has been received by our unallocated cash team and an adjustment is processed against this record, then the contributions already paid or on the employee contribution statement will update to include that end of year payment. Whereas when you're submitting the end of year form, then you just need to make sure that it does reflect, whatever you enter reflects the total of what has already been paid. So obviously, as employee contributions, as employer contributions, and as AVCs, if any apply. So in this instance, we go through and we're going to say, well, that's fine, we're going to wait for this adjustment to take its course. This particular GP, test GP, doesn't have any solo contributions, any solo income, but if they did, then of course these boxes in the solo section would populate in the same way: contributions due, contributions already paid, and then any difference. And again, there would be the difference box would be populated there on the screen. But we click through to save and next, and that will take us into the next page. We're able to upload any information. We can upload attachments, and if you're not familiar with the upload function in PCSE Online, then all you need to do is to click the browse to find a file in your desktop or wherever you save your files, and then when you can see the file, then you just click this up arrow for upload, and then you click save and next, and that will allow you to attach that. So if there has been an end of year payment, then enter some information to indicate that in the additional information box, and the template can be uploaded here if you haven't already submitted it through a Contact Us form. Save and next, and we work our way towards the end of the certificate. So obviously when we get to the declaration section, then this is the point where we have to select whether or not we're going to have any, if we have solo income, if we're going to have it all collected through the practice contract. We would tick to confirm. Again, we just get a warning message to check what we've entered before we submit. We click submit, and that's us done. Obviously, if we had solo to submit, then we would have an extra declaration. But all in all, pretty straightforward as we go through that. And like I say, if we go to the employee contributions statement open, then as I was saying earlier, then we can filter in the different years and search for the different practices if someone works at multiple practices, and you can filter things down. So it is really very easy to navigate PCSE Online once you're logged in, once you get used to moving around, and you do have all of the information you need at your fingertips. Debbie, I don't know if there's any questions.
So I'll just jump to some of the questions that have come through. Why does my employee contribution statement not match the pension contributions I can see on my payslips?
That's related to the estimates. So I think we've mentioned earlier on that the practice will submit an estimate upfront for each year. So very shortly, NHS Pensions will publish the estimate form for 23-24. Practices will submit an estimated income and indicate which tier rates that the GP or the non-GP partner has to be put on. So the contributions on a monthly basis will be deducted from the practice based on that information. In the practice, it may be that, particularly if somebody has a monthly salary or whatever, things might get adjusted throughout the year, but the estimate may not be revised. So we strongly encourage practices to go in and either complete a salary change form or a revised estimate if things do change. But if that hasn't been done, or there's been some changes that haven't come through, then the correct contributions will be taken at source from the GP or the non-GP partner, I guess. And when it comes to this end of year reconciliation, then the adjustment, as we've just talked about, would be taken through the practice because they've already taken it at source from the GP. So I know that 1 or 2 people have worried in the past that as an individual, would we be looking to take these deductions from them? But of course, we wouldn't, but that difference is due to changes that occur, and that's what this end of year, the purpose of this end of year reconciliation really is, you know, that we need to complete on behalf of NHS England under the pensions rules, really.
Lovely, thank you for that, Katrina. So I will just move on to the next one. So if my accountant has sent me the Type 1 form that they have completed, can I use PCSE Online?
Yeah, okay, so from the accountant, so a lot of accountants, don't know if it's every single accountant, but most accountants have some sort of software package based around Excel, where when they've, you know, pulling together all the end of year data, then they'll generate the certificate and send it to their client. That actually, all of the data on that certificate, the PCSE Online form for Type 1 is an exact replica of that. So it is possible for the GP or the non-GP partner to log in and key all of that information in. So it's, you know, takes a few minutes to go through each of the screens, but as you go through that, you can see the auto calculations. You can check that you know, matches what your accountant has presented you with, and from that instant, you know that as soon as you've clicked submit, you know that certificate is then, we talked about that declarated status, so that's sitting then waiting for PCSE to review it. So it is possible to do that, and I know that some people did do that last year, because last year was the first year that we had PCSE Online available for end of year forms. Then alternatively, there is still the contact us route, as we've mentioned. So from that point of view, then we have still got that traditional route if you decide that at this stage you don't want to use PCSE Online.
Fantastic, thanks Katrina. So let's have a look. So I've got another one coming up. What do I do if PCSE Online shows less solo income than I earned? So
from a solo point of view, then you should have an annual solo form. And that annual solo declaration should be completed by the GP and the solo provider. So if you have a look at your PCSE Online employee contribution statement and it doesn't match total income, as you said there, Debbie, doesn't match what you think you've earned as solo and have contributed to, then if you make sure that you send a copy of your annual solo form into PCSE, then we would then be able to look at our records, and if we need to, then we would contact the solo provider and get that updated for you.
That's great, thanks Katrina. So we'll just move on to the last question now. So it's been asked, what happens if I was on a tier rate of 13.5% during 2021-22, but with what I earned, I should have been paying 14.5%?
I think the scenario there must be then, there could be a number of reasons, I suppose. Somebody could even have selected the wrong tier rate, I guess. But for whatever reason, then the contributions have been paid over, being deducted at 13.5%. So when it comes to completing the annual certificate, then as you go through the screens, then when you select the correct tier rate of 14.5%, then the system will automatically calculate what the underpayment is, so across the whole year, and will present that as an underpaid amount, and that will then be deducted through the adjustment process that we talked about.
That's great, thanks Katrina.
Okay. Questions around types of forms and how we get registered? There's some people who've joined who may be trainee GPs or who are locum only GPs, so there we would point you towards the guidance on the NHS Pensions website for absolute clarity on the forms, end of year forms that you need to complete. But broadly speaking, if you're a locum only GP, then there isn't an end of year form that you need to complete. If you are a salaried GP, then you would complete a Type 2 form, which tonight has been all about Type 1. We are hosting a Type 2 webinar tomorrow night and another one the following evening. If you are a GP who does just solo work or solo and locum work, you also need to complete a Type 2 self-assessment. So tomorrow night or Wednesday night is definitely for you. But Type 1 GP partners and non-GP partners are the audience that needs to complete that. But like I mentioned, the NHS Pensions website has a wealth of information around the rules in relation to NHS pensions and around the, how the contribution tiers work, etc. And you should refer to that in the first instance if you need any technical guidance on what to submit. And I believe there was one other point that just about contributions starting. So I'd probably just pick up that question as the final question, Debbie. So I think we touched on it when I talked about, but it may not have been obvious to people that are just starting as a salaried GP or GP partner for the first time. So if you've just started a new practice, then just for the avoidance of doubt, it's really important that you complete the performer list employment change in the first instance to say when you're starting at the practice, if you're a salaried GP, the practice approved that, and then as soon as they've approved that, they can complete the joiner form, which is where they say not only when you'll be starting, but what the estimated income and tier rate that your deductions have to be made based on are. If you are starting as a partner, then the ICB, the Integrated Care Board commissioning entity, basically needs to approve that also. So your performer list change gets practice approval and then ICB approval, and then only after that can the pensions joiner form be completed. Don't forget as well, if you're leaving a practice, don't forget to leave the practice in performer list terms and to make sure that the practice then leave you in pension terms. They would continue to get deductions from their monthly statements, monthly payments, if they don't. So I think hopefully a lot of food for thought and some helpful tips and guidance. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I hope it's been useful, and we hope that some of you will be encouraged to try PCSE Online. Have a good evening and thank you very much.